Hi friends, welcome to Telugu One Academy. As part of rapid revision of Polity, let us continue our discussion. The next topic is the executive branch of the government. So in India, we have parliamentary democracy at two levels because of the nature of the Indian constitution. So we all know that the Indian constitution is a federal constitution. So it obviously means we have two sets of government, one at the union level, one at the state level. So we have parliamentary democracy at the union level and also at the state level. Then let us take up the discussion of union executive. We all know that the executive branch at the union level includes the president, the vice president, prime minister, council of ministers, and also the attorney general. Then what is this parliamentary democracy which we have in India? See, in India we have a parliamentary democracy. Some of the features of the parliamentary democracy is, in a parliamentary democracy there is one important feature, dual executive. Dual executive. So which means in India at the union level we have nominal executive, real executive. This is one of the important features of the parliamentary democracy. Then what is a nominal executive? In India, the entire administration is carried on in the name of the president, but the president doesn't administer. So the administration is done by the prime minister and the council of ministers. So in India, the prime minister forms nominal executive. The prime minister and the council of ministers form a real executive. That's why the president is also called de jure authority. The prime minister and council of ministers, it is called de facto authority. So the entire administration is carried on in the name of the president, but the president doesn't govern the nation. So this is fundamentally different from presidential democracy which we had in United States of America. In United States of America, the American president is both the head of the American nation state and he is also the head of the government. But in India, the president is the head of the Indian nation state, the prime minister is the head of the government. So that is the meaning of dual executive. And then, as I said, the union executive, it consists of the president, vice president, prime minister and council of ministers. So let's take up our discussion on the president. As I said just now, the president of India represents the nation state, Indian nation state, and he is the nominal executive. So in the Constituent Assembly, when the election of the president was discussed, initially there was a demand to have a direct election for the office of the president. But later on, in the Constituent Assembly, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar has argued that an indirect election of the Indian president will be in tune with the parliamentary democracy. As I said just now, in parliamentary democracy, the real powers are with the prime minister and council of ministers. If there is an elected president, then it is not in sync with the parliamentary democracy. So that's the reason why in India we have provided for an indirect election to the office of the president. An indirect election to the office of the president. Then, who is eligible to become the president of India? A person to contest to the office of the president must be a citizen of India, and he should have completed 35 years of age, and he should have be eligible to get elected to the Lok Sabha. These are the requirements. Then, in addition to this, by the time he gets elected to the office of the president, he should not be a member of Lok Sabha or member of Rajya Sabha. If he is a member of Lok Sabha and a member of Rajya Sabha, as soon as he assumes office, he will lose his membership in the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. Then, what about the election of the president? So the president is elected by a body called Electoral College. the president is elected by a body called electoral college. Then what is the composition of the electoral college? So the electoral college will contain the following members: the elected members of Lok Sabha, the elected members of Rajya Sabha, the elected members of the legislative assemblies in this country. So which means nominated members of Rajya Sabha, nominated members of legislative assembly, nominated members of Lok Sabha, and all the members of the legislative council, they do not participate in the election of the president. And as the president is chosen by members of the electoral college who are elected members of the parliament and also the elected members of the state legislative assemblies, he represents both the nation and also the states. Initially in the Constituent Assembly, it was discussed that it is enough to get the president elected through the members of the parliament. But he doesn't represent the entire country in true sense. That's the reason why finally it was provided that the electoral college should contain the elected members of parliament and also the elected members of the legislative assemblies. That's why we say the Indian president, he represents the interests of not only the country, but he also represents the interests of the states. And then how do you calculate the value of the vote of an MLA? So while conducting elections to the office of the president, value of the vote of an MLA in every state. So this is calculated by using the formula population of the state divided by total number of elected MLAs from that particular state into 1 by 1000. This is how the value of the vote of an MLA is calculated. Say for example, in the state of Telangana, if you want to calculate the value of the vote of an MLA in the state of Telangana, you need to divide the population of Telangana in the 1971 census by total number of MLAs, elected MLAs into 1 by 1000. So this will give the value of the vote of each MLA in the state of Telangana. Like this, if you can calculate the value of the votes of all the MLAs in all the legislative assemblies in this country, and if you divide that by the total number of elected members of parliament, that will give you the value of the vote of each MP. So how do you calculate the value of the vote of an MP? First you should calculate the total value of all the votes of all the MLAs in the legislative assemblies, divide that with the total number of elected members of Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. So that will give you the value of the vote of each elected MP. In other words, in India, while conducting elections to the office of the president, the value of the votes of all elected MLAs is equal to the value of the votes of all elected MPs of the parliament. So the election of the president is done by means of proportional representation by single transferable vote. So the member of the electoral college, he is called elector. The members of the electoral college, they are called electors. So if a person has to contest to the office of the president, his candidature must be proposed by 50 electors and supported by another 50 electors. This is the requirement. And at the time of elections to the office of the president, every elector will give as many preferences as the number of candidates who are contesting to the office of the president. So the one who secures more than 50% of the valid votes polled will be declared as won. And if there is any dispute with respect to election to the office of the president, the matters are decided by the Supreme Court, which means the high courts cannot decide the election disputes with respect to the election of the president. It is only the Supreme Court which is given that power, which means it is the original jurisdiction of the Indian Supreme Court. Then the next question is, while calculating the value of the vote of an MLA, why are we using the population census of 1971? Here the reason is, when Mrs. Indira Gandhi was the Prime Minister, through the 42nd Amendment, through the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act of 1976, when the constituencies of both Lok Sabha and Legislative Assembly are delimited, it will be done on the basis of the 1971 census population. So that is what is incorporated in the Indian Constitution by 42nd Amendment. This is to encourage the states to bring down the population growth rates. And this was initially extended for 25 years. Later on, the 84th Constitutional Amendment Act has extended this freeze on delimiting the constituencies for another 25 years. So that's the reason why when we calculate the value of the vote of an MLA, we are using the population of the 1971 census. We are not using the population of the recent census, which is the 2011 census. That's about the election of the President of India. If there is any dispute with respect to the election to the office of the President, the matter goes before the Supreme Court. Then what about tenure? The President will have a tenure of 5 years. And the President can get elected to the office of the President any number of times. For example, if you compare this with the office of the President of United States of America, the American President can contest only 2 times. For the maximum, he can contest 2 times and he can have 2 tenures. So in America, the tenure of the American President is 4 years and he can have 2 tenures. But in India, the tenure of the President of India is 5 years. He can have as many number of tenures as possible if he is allowed to do that. So theoretically, a person can contest the office of the President any number of times. There is no constitutional limitation on the number of tenures of the President of India. Then what about the security of tenure? So in India, if you want to remove the President of India, you need a very tough majority. That is called 2/3 of the total strength. 2/3 of the total strength. So this removal is technically called impeachment. The President of India can be removed from the office on the ground of violation of the Indian Constitution. For violating the Constitution of India, the President can be removed from his office by passing an impeachment motion. The impeachment motion has to be passed by both Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha by 2/3 of the total strength. So this is the toughest majority which is required under the Indian Constitution. But to initiate the impeachment, 1/4 of either Lok Sabha, 1/4 of the strength of either Lok Sabha or 1/4 of the strength of Rajya Sabha shall initiate a motion for impeaching the President of India. And later on, when the motion is taken up and once it is admitted, the removal is formally taken up and the President is removed through a majority of 2/3 of the total strength. So in the entire strength of Lok Sabha, irrespective of the vacancies, 2/3 of the members shall agree. Similarly in Rajya Sabha, irrespective of the number of vacancies, in the total strength, 2/3 of the members shall agree for the removal of the President. So if the impeachment motion is passed by this majority, then the President of India stands removed. So it is very difficult to remove the President of India because you need a very tough majority. Obtaining that majority is very difficult. Then let's move to the powers of the Indian President. The first one, executive powers. See, the President of India appoints Prime Minister and other ministers. But usually, so a person, a member of Parliament who belongs to the majority party will be chosen as the Prime Minister. After the general elections to the Lok Sabha, whichever political party or a coalition of political parties secures more than 50% of the seats in the Lok Sabha, the leader of that party, the leader of the coalition of that party will be invited to form the government and he will be appointed as the Prime Minister. So the Prime Minister is appointed by the President of India. On the advice of the Prime Minister, The other members of the Council of Ministers are appointed. This is one power. In addition to this, when it comes to executive powers, so most of the important appointments are done in the name of the President. For example, the President appoints judges of the Supreme Court, judges of the High Court. He also appoints the chairman and members of the Union Public Service Commission. He appoints the Chief Election Commissioner and other election commissioners in the Election Commission of India. He appoints the ambassadors. He appoints the Controller and Auditor General of India. So these are called executive powers of the Indian President. The next one, ordinance making powers. Within executive powers, we have ordinance making powers. So what do you mean by ordinance making powers? So when I told you about the constitutional development under the British rule, I referred to one important legislation made by the British Parliament, that is Indian Councils Act of 1861. Under the Indian Councils Act of 1861, the governor at the provincial level was given the power to issue an ordinance when the legislature is not in session and when there is urgency. So an ordinance, what is an ordinance? An ordinance is nothing but a law made by the executive branch. So in India, we have three branches of the government: executive branch, legislative branch, judicial branch. So legislature does law making, executive does law implementation, judiciary does law interpretation. So at the union level, law making is done by Indian Parliament. At the state level, law making is done by the state legislature. So if there is a parliament to do law making, why should the executive make a law? Yes, the executive can make laws provided if the parliament is not in session. If the parliament is not in session and if there is urgency, if there is a purpose of immediate action, then the constitution has empowered the president to issue ordinances on all the subjects in the union list. I said in the 7th schedule, there is reference to three lists: union list, state list, concurrent list. So list 1 is union list. As of today, in the union list we have 98 items. So with respect to all the items in the union list, the president can issue ordinance. Then what is an ordinance? An ordinance is a law made by the executive branch of the government when the parliament is not in session and when there is urgency. So any ordinance which is made by the president will have a maximum life of 6 months and 6 weeks. Once an ordinance is issued by the president, it can be in force for a maximum period of 6 months and 6 weeks. So within 6 months, 6 weeks, the ordinance has to be taken before the parliament. Then, is it a discretionary power of the Indian president? The power of the Indian president to issue an ordinance is not a discretionary power. So this power is exercised by the Indian president on the advice of the Council of Ministers headed by Prime Minister. So the power of the president to issue an ordinance, this power is exercised on the advice of the Council of Ministers headed by Prime Minister. And in many cases, the Supreme Court said DC Wadhwa versus State of Bihar. DC Wadhwa versus State of Bihar. This was in 1986. And again we had a recent case, Krishna Kumar Singh versus State of Bihar. In both these cases, the Supreme Court said repeated promulgation of ordinances, promulgating ordinances again and again without taking the matter before the parliament is a violation of the Indian Constitution. Such ordinances are liable to be struck down. That's what the Supreme Court said. DC Wadhwa versus State of Bihar 1986, Krishna Kumar Singh versus State of Bihar. So these two judgments, they relate to misusing the powers of the president and governor while issuing ordinances. So an ordinance can be issued only when those two conditions are met. The first condition is the parliament shall not be in session. The second condition is there shall be urgency, there shall be some purpose of immediate action. If these two conditions are fulfilled, ordinances can be issued. But you cannot issue the same ordinance again and again to bypass the parliament. If ordinances are issued again and again to conveniently bypass the parliament, which is the body which was entrusted with the power of law making, then all such ordinances which are issued are liable to be struck down by the Indian Supreme Court. So such judgments have come because in the past we had a number of examples where the president had misused his power to issue ordinances, and similarly in several states the governors also have misused their powers of issuing ordinances. So to keep the executive branch on its toes, to check the power of the executive branch, to issue ordinances and to prevent abuse of this power, so the Supreme Court has laid down a number of guidelines both in Krishna Kumar Singh as well as DC Wadhwa case. That's about the executive powers of the Indian president. The next one, legislative powers. See, the president is part of the Indian parliament. So any bill, whether it is an ordinary bill or money bill or a constitutional amendment bill, so any bill passed by both houses of the parliament shall get approval from the parliament. Unless the president gives his approval, the bill will not become an act. So one of the main powers of the Indian president is, on the advice of the Council of Ministers headed by Prime Minister, the president will summon the houses of the parliament to meet in session. The president has the power to end the sessions. So summoning and proroguing, these are the two words. Saman, asking the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha to meet in session, that is saman. The next one is prorogue. Prorogue means ending the session of the parliament. There is one more word called adjournment. So adjournment is done by the presiding officer. So if it is Lok Sabha, the speaker of the Lok Sabha, if it is Rajya Sabha, the chairman of Rajya Sabha will adjourn the house. But when it comes to summoning the house, asking the house to meet and also ending the session of the house, this is done by the president. Again, it is not a discretionary power. So when the parliament should meet, when the sessions of the parliament shall come to an end, so it is decided by the Council of Ministers headed by Prime Minister, and on their advice the president does it. And when the parliament meets after the general elections to Lok Sabha, the president addresses the joint session. So members of Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha sit together and the session is addressed by the president through the president address, through the president's speech. Similarly, every year the first session of the parliament is a joint session addressed by the Indian president. In addition to that, if the prime minister loses majority in the lower house, if the prime minister loses majority in the lower house, then the government has to resign. So when the government resigns, the president will decide whether to go for fresh elections, or he can decide, he can see whether an alternative government is possible or not. So here the president has got a situational discretion. So if the government which is in power has lost majority and if the government has resigned, so after the resignation of the government, what shall be done? Whether to go for fresh elections or see the possibility of the forming of alternative government, here the president had the discretion. And in addition to that, a prime minister who has absolute majority in the Lok Sabha, if the prime minister recommends to the president to dissolve the Lok Sabha, it is binding on the president to dissolve the Lok Sabha. So a prime minister who enjoys comfortable majority in the Lok Sabha, if he recommends to the president to dissolve the Lok Sabha, the president is bound to dissolve the Lok Sabha. But a prime minister who has lost majority in the Lok Sabha, if he recommends to the president to dissolve the Lok Sabha to avoid facing the no confidence motion or confidence motion, then the president is not bound to dissolve the Lok Sabha. He can exercise his discretion. Then in addition to this, all the bills passed by the Indian Parliament, they must go before the president. Unless the president gives his assent, the bills will not become laws. So here, what are the powers of the Indian president? Here we have several categories of vetoes, which we say absolute veto, suspensive veto, pocket veto. Then what do you mean by absolute veto, suspensive veto and pocket veto? So with respect to a private member bill, the Indian president has got absolute veto. Absolute veto means the president will say that I will not give assent to the bill. If the president withholds assent to any bill, then that is called absolute veto. In other words, the president can say no to a bill. So where such absolute veto is exercised? So there are certain categories, the bills can be broadly categorized into two: government bills, private bills. A government bill is a bill which is introduced by the minister in the government. A private member bill is a bill introduced by the member of the parliament who is not a minister. So with respect to private member bills, the president can exercise absolute veto. Then the second situation where the absolute veto is used is, so if a new government has come into place and there was a bill which was passed in the parliament in the earlier Lok Sabha, in the earlier government, now the bill is yet to receive the assent. So if the new government advises the president not to give the assent to the bill, then the president can do that. The president can say no to a bill which is passed in the earlier government but which is pending with the president. So these are the two situations where the Indian president can exercise absolute veto. Absolute veto means rejecting the bill, saying no to the bill. Private member bill is one example. The second one is a bill which is passed under the earlier government can be rejected by the president on the advice of the new government. The next one is suspensive veto. What is suspensive veto? So if an ordinary bill is passed by Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha and if it is sent to the President of India, if the President has got any objection with respect to the provisions of the bill, the President can send this bill back to the Parliament for reconsideration. After reconsidering the bill, if it again goes back to the President for the second time, the President now cannot say no. So the President can say no only in the first instance. The second instance he cannot say no. That is called suspensive veto. So an ordinary bill passed by the Parliament, if it goes to the President, he can say no once. He can send it back to the Parliament for reconsideration. After reconsideration, if the same bill is sent to the President of India for the second time, the President cannot say no. He has to give assent to that bill. So this is called suspensive veto. The next one is pocket veto. What is pocket veto? So in the Constitution of India, there is no definite time frame within which the President has to give assent to the bill. So as there was no definite time limit, once a bill is passed by the Parliament and sent to the President of India, the President can keep it pending without giving the assent. That is called suspensive veto. That is called pocket veto. That is called pocket veto. So in the past we had one example. The then President R. Venkatraman had exercised a pocket veto with respect to Indian postal bill. But this is something, if the President exercises pocket veto, this goes against the principles of parliamentary democracy. Because if the elected government, if the elected parliament decides on a bill, sends it to the President for giving the assent, and if the President, who is the nominal executive, keeps it pending, then that means you are undermining the will of the elected parliament. So it becomes unconstitutional for the President to have such a behavior, because when the President takes oath, he says that he will preserve, protect and defend the Constitution of India, which means the President is not expected to go against the spirit of the Constitution, to go against the letter of the Constitution. So a bill, theoretically we say that the Indian President has got pocket veto. Even in practice in the past, this power was exercised. But after the 42nd Amendment and the 44th Amendment to the Indian Constitution, it was very clearly laid down in the Constitution of India that the President is bound by the advice of the Council of Ministers headed by Prime Minister. So which means the President shall give his assent to any bill passed by the Parliament within a reasonable time frame. So without valid reasons, if the President keeps the bill pending with him without assigning reasons, that goes against the grain of the spirit of democracy and parliamentary democracy. Though it was used once in the past, but the instances of use of pocket veto have greatly come down in the recent past. That's it about the legislative powers of the President. Then we have the emergency powers. The emergency powers of the Indian President. This we have already discussed in detail in the earlier video. So the President can declare national emergency, state emergency and financial emergency on the advice of the Cabinet headed by Prime Minister. And this we have already discussed. The next one is financial powers. we all know that every year the government at the union level and at the state level comes up with something called the budget. Budget is also called annual financial statement. So it is also called the money bill. So a money bill can be introduced in the Lok Sabha only with the prior recommendation of the president. And the president also heads the contingency fund of India. So the money for emergency purposes can be withdrawn from the contingency fund of India, and the president is the custodian. So on the advice of the Council of Ministers headed by Prime Minister, the president can withdraw money from the contingency fund. So there are several categories of bills: money bills, financial bill type 1, financial bill type 2. So these are the powers of the financial powers of the Indian president. Then we have one more category of powers called judicial powers. So it is possible that when the courts decide on the punishments, it is possible that the courts may do a mistake. So if any innocent person gets punished by the courts despite innocence, as a last measure of resort, he can try that from the president, he can seek clemency. He can apply for clemency with the President of India. So under the Constitution of India, there are several kinds of judicial powers for the President of India, like pardoning power, pardon, commutation, respite, remission, reprieve. So when it comes to pardon, a person who was convicted in a court of law gets pardon from the president, he becomes completely a normal, free individual. He doesn't need to suffer, he doesn't need to undergo any punishment, including the death penalty. The next one is a commutation. If a severe form of punishment is replaced by a lighter form of punishment, that is called a commutation. The next one is remission. So without changing the character of the punishment, if the duration of the punishment is reduced, that is called a remission. The next one is a respite. In special cases, when the convict is disabled, when the convict is pregnant, then the punishment will be reduced, that is called a respite. The last one, a reprieve. A convict can apply for clemency with the President of India. So the punishment will be stayed, the execution of the punishment will be stayed, allowing the convict to apply for clemency with the President of India. That is called a reprieve. These are the judicial powers of the President of India. That's it about the judicial powers of the President. Then let's move to Vice President. See, the office of the Vice President in India, it is modeled on the lines of the office of the Vice President in United States of America. In other words, the office of the Vice President in India is borrowed from the office of the Vice President in USA. In United States of America, the American Parliament is bicameral. We all know that. The American Parliament has got two houses. The upper house is called American Senate. The lower house is called House of Representatives. So the Vice President of USA will preside over the American Senate. So the presiding officer, the chairman of the American Senate, is the Vice President. On the same lines, even in India, we have the parliament which is bicameral. So the upper house is called Rajya Sabha, the lower house is called Lok Sabha. So Rajya Sabha will have a presiding officer who is called a chairman. So the Vice President of India will act as the chairman of Rajya Sabha. So the primary duty of the Vice President of India is to act as the chairman of Rajya Sabha. Then the Vice President, what are the qualifications to contest to the office of the Vice President? You must be a citizen of India. You must have completed 35 years of age. You must be a person who is eligible to become the member of Rajya Sabha. And the Vice President is chosen. The election of the Vice President is again indirect, like the President of India. So the Indian Vice President is chosen by an electoral college consisting of all the members of Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. So there is a body called Electoral College, and in this Electoral College all the members of Lok Sabha and all the members of Rajya Sabha are members. So this body will choose the Vice President of India. Then when it comes to the office of the Vice President, The Vice President will have a tenure of 5 years. The Vice President will have a tenure of 5 years and he can get elected to the office of the Vice President any number of times. But when it comes to the removal of the Vice President, in Rajya Sabha, we use effective majority. In Lok Sabha, he is removed by simple majority. So when the removal of the Vice President is taken up in the Rajya Sabha, from all the then members of the Rajya Sabha, more than 50% shall agree. That is called effective majority. So in the total strength of Rajya Sabha, you need to take out the vacancies. In the remaining strength, what is called the effective strength, more than 50% shall agree for the removal of the Vice President. That is called effective majority. So the Vice President of India is removed through effective majority in the Rajya Sabha. When it comes to Lok Sabha, he is removed by simple majority, more than 50% of the members present and voting. So the Vice President of India, in addition to acting as the chairman of Rajya Sabha, he can also act as the President of India if a vacancy arises in the office of the President. For any reason, if a vacancy arises in the office of the President, the Vice President can act as the acting President. That's about the Vice President of India. Then let's move to Prime Minister and Council of Ministers. So here, the next one, the Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers. So here, along with this, the Council of Ministers, Prime Minister and Council of Ministers we will discuss. As I said, India is a parliamentary democracy. In India, the Council of Ministers headed by Prime Minister forms the real executive and the President is the nominal executive. If the President is the head of the Indian nation state, Prime Minister is the head of the government. So the de facto powers are with the Prime Minister heading the Council of Ministers. Then the 91st Amendment of the Indian Constitution, the 91st Amendment done to the Indian Constitution in 2003, it has fixed the strength of the Council of Ministers. The total strength of the Council of Ministers cannot exceed 15% of the Lok Sabha, including the Prime Minister. The maximum size of the Council of Ministers cannot exceed 15% of the strength of Lok Sabha. In other words, the Constitution has put a limit on the size of the Council of Ministers. Then, as I said, the President, soon after the general elections to the Lok Sabha, any party which secures more than 50% of the seats in the Lok Sabha, or if there is a coalition or a group of political parties which has secured a majority of the seats in the Lok Sabha, from that party, from that coalition, the leader will be asked to swear in as the Prime Minister of India. So, under the Constitution of India, the Prime Minister is appointed by the President. On the advice of the Prime Minister, other ministers are appointed. And here the President doesn't have any choice in appointing the ministers, because he has to rely on the advice of the Prime Minister. He cannot have his own nominees. And then one very important feature of parliamentary democracy is principle of collective responsibility. Principle of collective responsibility, which means in a parliamentary democracy, all the decisions are made collectively by the entire Council of Ministers headed by Prime Minister. And the Council of Ministers headed by Prime Minister, they are collectively responsible to the Lok Sabha, the lower house. So in India, which had parliamentary democracy, again there is one more unique feature, which is the fusion of executive and legislative branches. So in all the parliamentary democracies across the world, the executive and legislative branches, they overlap. After the general elections to the Lok Sabha, whichever party secures more than 50% of the seats, it will form the government. So in parliamentary democracy, the government, the executive branch is formed from the legislature, from a party having majority in the lower house. And this executive branch is made accountable to the legislature. That accountability is called principle of collective responsibility. So the entire Council of Ministers headed by Prime Minister is made accountable to the Lok Sabha. Then in the Constitution of India, there is Article 53, Article 74, Article 75, Article 78. So these are the important articles with respect to the Prime Minister and Council of Ministers. Article 53 says, all the actions of the union government, so the entire administration at the union level is carried on in the name of the President. The administration at the union level is carried on in the name of the President, but the President doesn't administer. Remember, the administration is done by the Council of Ministers headed by Prime Minister. Then the next one is Article 74. This article is very important. The reason is, before 1976, the word used in the article is may. Later on in 1976, it was replaced with the word shall, which means Article 74 says, the President shall act on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers headed by Prime Minister. So before 1976, before 42nd Amendment, the word used in the article is may. The President may act on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers headed by Prime Minister, which means may means may not be also. So Mrs. Indira Gandhi in 1976 through the 42nd Amendment has replaced the word may with the shall. Shall, it means the President is bound by the advice. So in 1976 through the 42nd Amendment in Article 74, the word may is replaced with the shall. So now Article 74 reads that the President shall act on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers headed by Prime Minister, which means the President cannot do anything without the advice of the Council of Ministers headed by Prime Minister. Then Article 74 also says, that what advice is given by the Council of Ministers headed by Prime Minister to the President cannot be questioned in any court of law. But here we should also remember one more amendment, 44th Amendment. This was in 1978. So 42nd Amendment was brought in by Mrs. Indira Gandhi belonging to Congress Party, and after 1977, so we had internal emergency between 1975 and 1977. So after the emergency got over, Janata Party has brought in the 44th Amendment. So the 44th Amendment has again amended Article 74. So this 44th Amendment says, the advice given by the Council of Ministers headed by Prime Minister to the President can be rejected by the President. The President can ask the Council of Ministers headed by Prime Minister to reconsider that advice. So once the advice is reconsidered, and if it is again sent back to the President for the second time, then this time the President is bound by that advice. So that was the change which was brought in by 44th Amendment by Janata Party government. As per the 42nd Amendment, the President cannot reject the advice given by the Council of Ministers. But as per the 44th Amendment of the Indian Constitution, the President can say no once to the advice. But if the advice is sent back to the Council of Ministers headed by Prime Minister for reconsideration, and if the same advice is again given to the President, then the President is bound by that advice. So this power to the Indian President to send back the advice to the Council of Ministers headed by Prime Minister for reconsideration, this was made possible through the 44th Amendment. Then Article 75 says that the Prime Minister is appointed by the President. On the advice of the Prime Minister, the other ministers are appointed. And I told you, the size of the Council of Ministers is fixed at 15% of the total strength. And Article 75 also says, a member of Parliament who is disqualified under anti-defection law will also become disqualified to be a minister till he gets re-elected. So that's what Article 75 says. And Article 75 also says, the entire Council of Ministers headed by Prime Minister, they are collectively responsible to Lok Sabha. Then Article 78. Article 78 says, this Article 78, it speaks about the relationship between the Prime Minister and Council of Ministers. The relationship between the Prime Minister and Council of Ministers. So it is the duty of the Prime Minister as per Article 78 to keep the President informed about all the matters of administration and also all the proposals of legislations. If there is any decision which is taken by a minister without being presented to the Council of Ministers, then the President in his discretion can ask the Prime Minister to put that decision taken by an individual minister before the Council of Ministers for collective decision making. That's what Article 78 says. So these are the important articles 53, 74, 75 and 78 with respect to the Prime Minister and Council of Ministers. Then in India we have three categories of ministers. We have Cabinet Minister, Minister of State, and Deputy Ministers. But you don't see this in the Constitution of India. The Constitution of India uses only two keywords, Council of Ministers and the Cabinet. So the Council of Ministers is one word which was used, and in 1978 through the 44th Amendment the word Cabinet was inserted in the Indian Constitution. So I told you when I discussed with you the emergency provisions of the Indian Constitution, national emergency can be declared by the Indian President on the written advice of the Cabinet headed by Prime Minister. So this word Cabinet was inserted in the Indian Constitution in 1978 through the 44th Amendment. So before 1978, we did not have the word Cabinet in the Constitution of India. So we have the word Cabinet and also the Council of Ministers, but we don't see the Minister of State and a Deputy Minister. A Minister of State is one of the ministers who work under the Cabinet Minister in charge of one or more departments. And the Deputy Minister are again the ministers who assist the Cabinet Minister in his work. So in terms of ranking, this is the descending order. So Cabinet Minister will have a higher rank, followed by the Minister of State and then the Deputy Minister. And to assist the Cabinet Ministers in the work of legislative responsibilities, there is also appointment of parliamentary secretaries. They are not ministers. Parliamentary secretaries, they are people who assist the Cabinet Minister in the legislative responsibilities. So that's it about the President, Vice President, Prime Minister and Council of Ministers. And when the President takes the oath, he says that he will preserve, protect and defend the Constitution of India. So let us try to discuss about the State Executive. See, in the earlier video, as part of the Union Executive, we have discussed about the President, Vice President, Prime Minister and Council of Ministers. And we have left Attorney General of India. See, Attorney General of India is the Chief Legal Officer of Government of India. So he represents the Union government in both the Supreme Court and also the several high courts. And when it comes to the state level, at the state level, the State Executive includes the Governor, Chief Minister, Council of Ministers and also Advocate General. So Advocate General is the Chief Legal Officer of the concerned state government. Then as I said in the earlier video, even at the state level we have parliamentary democracy. So at the state level, Governor is the constitutional head of the state government and the Chief Minister and the Council of Ministers, they form the real executive. Governor forms nominal executive. The Chief Minister and Council of Ministers forms the real executive. At the state level, the entire administration is carried on in the name of the Governor, but the Governor doesn't administer. The administration is done by the Council of Ministers headed by Chief Minister. So Governor is the constitutional head, he forms the nominal executive. The Chief Minister and Council of Ministers forms the real executive. Then let's try to discuss about the Governor. So Governor, the eligibility criteria, then appointment and tenure, powers of the Governor, responsibilities, the role of the Governor, and there were certain issues with respect to the institution of Governor. Even in the recent past, there was an important judgment given by the Supreme Court. Governor of Tamil Nadu versus State of Tamil Nadu. This was an important judgment. It has run into several pages that we will discuss at the end. Then before that, how the governor is appointed, let us see. Governor, as I said, he is the constitutional head of the state government and forms the nominal executive. So initially there can be one governor for one state, but the 7th Constitutional Amendment Act 1956, it has allowed a governor, a person to be the governor of more than one state. Simultaneously, a person can be the governor of more than one state. This is allowed by 7th Constitutional Amendment Act of 1956. And in the Constituent Assembly, initially there was an argument to provide for a direct election of governor. But if the governor is directly elected, it will not be in sync with the parliamentary democracy. As per parliamentary democracy, there is dual executive, one is nominal and the other is real. So governor is expected to be nominal executive. So if there is a governor who is elected directly by the people through the right to vote, then this comes in conflict with the principles of parliamentary democracy. So finally it was decided that the governor will be appointed by the union government. And this is borrowed from the Canadian Constitution. In countries like United States of America, the governor is directly elected by the people. But in Canada, the governors of the provinces, they are appointed by the union government. On the same lines, even in India, the governors are nominated, they are appointed by the President of India on the advice of the Council of Ministers headed by Prime Minister. And then, what are the powers of the governor? So the governor, like the President of India, will have executive powers, legislative powers, judicial powers and financial powers. What are executive powers? So the chief minister is appointed by the governor. On the advice of the chief minister, other ministers are appointed by the governor. Then who can be appointed as the chief minister? After the general elections to the legislative assembly, a party which commands absolute majority of the seats in the lower house, from that party, the leader will be chosen as the chief minister. If no single party is able to secure majority in the lower house, and if there is a coalition of political parties which have come together, and if this coalition has secured majority in the lower house, then the leader of the coalition will be chosen as the chief minister by the governor. And on the advice of the chief minister, other ministers are appointed. That's how the chief minister is appointed. Then, ideally, for a person to become the chief minister of India, chief minister of any particular state, he should have been either member of legislative assembly or the legislative council. But the constitution allows a person who is not a member of the state legislature can also become the chief minister, but provided he must get elected to the state legislature within 6 months. Which means a person who is not a member of the state legislature can be in the office of the chief minister for not more than 6 months. Within 6 months, he must get elected to either legislative assembly or the legislative council. If that doesn't happen, then the person has to resign. Then again, as I said, the constitutional amendment which was done in 2003, the 91st amendment to the Indian Constitution has fixed the size of the council of ministers at the state level. So the size of the council of ministers, including the chief minister at the state level, cannot exceed 15% of the total strength of the legislative assembly. And in any case, it cannot be less than 12. That's what the Constitution of India says. Then what are the executive powers? See, when it comes to executive powers, as I said, the governor will appoint the chief minister. On the advice of the chief minister, he will appoint the other ministers. Then in addition to that, so at the state level, you have a state election commissioner. The state election commissioner is appointed by the governor. But remember, though the state election commissioner is appointed by the governor, he can be removed only by the president. The two, by parliament passing the removal motion by special majority. Similarly, the governor will also appoint the chairman and members of the State Public Service Commission on the advice of the Council of Ministers headed by Chief Minister. Though the chairman and members of the State Public Service Commission are appointed by the governor, the removal is again in the hands of the president. On the basis of the inquiry done by the Supreme Court, the president can remove the chairman and members of the Public Service Commission. So these are executive powers of the governor. Then here again we should also discuss the ordinance making powers. Ordinance making powers also comes under executive powers. I said when the state legislature is not in session and when there is urgency, when there is a purpose of immediate action, the governor can issue ordinance. As I said earlier, an ordinance is a law made by the executive branch. So with respect to all the subjects in the state list, so as of now we have around 59 items in the state list. With respect to all the 59 items in the state list, the governor can issue ordinance. But remember, this is not a discretionary power. The governor can issue ordinance only on the advice of the Council of Ministers headed by Chief Minister. Again, as I said in the earlier video, DC Wadhwa versus State of Bihar was an important case which was decided in 1986. In this case, the Supreme Court said, if the governor issues ordinances again and again without going before the state legislature, then such ordinances are a fraud on the Indian Constitution. So the ordinance route cannot be taken to bypass the elected state legislature. That's what the Supreme Court said, because in the state of Bihar, for almost 14 years the state was administered through ordinances issued by the governor without going before the state legislative assembly of Bihar and the elected state legislature. So that's what the Supreme Court said in DC Wadhwa versus State of Bihar. That's about the executive powers. Then when it comes to the legislative powers, like the President of India, on the advice of the Council of Ministers headed by Chief Minister, the governor summons the state legislature to meet in session. The governor can also prorogue end the session of the Legislative Assembly and the Legislative Council. Then if there is the meeting of the Legislative Assembly soon after the general elections, so the first session of the state legislature is addressed by the governor. And every year the first session is again addressed by the governor. If the Chief Minister loses majority in the lower house, then the Chief Minister must resign. In such a situation, whether to go for fresh elections or to see the possibility of forming an alternative government, the governor had discretion. Again, when there is a hung assembly, if no political party commands majority in the lower house after the general elections, whom to invite to form the government, the governor had discretion. In addition to this, a bill which is passed by the state legislature must get the assent of the governor before it becomes a law. So here the governor enjoys, what are the options before the governor when a bill reaches to him? This has been in the news that we will discuss now in detail. So a bill which is passed by the state legislature, if it goes to before the governor for assent, the governor can say no, the governor can say yes, the governor can send it for reconsideration to the state legislature. The fourth option is the governor can reserve it for the consideration of the president. Let's take the first one. A bill passed by the state legislature, if it is sent to the governor for the assent, the governor can say yes, he can accept the bill, he can give his assent to the bill. If he gives assent to the bill, then there is no problem, the bill becomes an act. If the governor says no, that is called a absolute veto. But the governor should give the reasons, valid reasons why he says no. Recently the Supreme Court said the governor doesn't have absolute veto, the governor cannot reject any bill. The third one is a bill passed by the state legislature, that is suspensive veto. A bill passed by the state legislature, if it is sent to the governor for the assent, if the governor had any objections, he can send the bill back to the state legislature for reconsideration. After reconsidering the bill, if the state legislature sends it back to the governor, this time the governor is bound to give his assent. This did not happen in the state of Tamil Nadu. In the state of Tamil Nadu, the governor has initially rejected the bills passed by the state legislature and has sent them for reconsideration. After reconsideration, when the bills have come back to the governor instead of giving assent to the bills, he had reserved it for the consideration of the president. So that was declared as invalid by the Supreme Court in the recent case, Governor of Tamil Nadu versus State of Tamil Nadu. Because bills which are reconsidered once and if they are sent to the governor back, the president is bound to give the assent. So in this case, in the state of Tamil Nadu, the governor went against the spirit of the constitution and the letter of the constitution. The fourth option is there are certain categories of bills which the governor can reserve for the consideration of the president. Soli Sorabji, in one of his books, has laid down the kinds of bills which the governor can reserve for the consideration of the president. Under Article 200, certain categories of bills can be reserved by the governor for the consideration of the president. What are these bills? If any bill passed by the state legislature is against the Constitution of India, if it is opposite to the directive principles of state policy, if it is against the larger interests of the nation, if it affects the powers of the High Court, in all such cases, the bills passed by the state legislature can be reserved by the governor for the consideration of the president. And Article 201 says, if a bill is reserved by the governor for the consideration of the president had the following options before him. He can say yes to the bill, he can say no to the bill, he can send it back for reconsideration. If it is sent back for the reconsideration to the state legislature must reconsider it within 6 months and should send it back to the president through the governor. So here, once the bill is reconsidered by the state legislature and if it goes back to the president again, the president can keep it indefinite time. But recently the Supreme Court said a bill which is reconsidered by the state legislature, if it goes to the president is bound to give his advice within 1 month. Similarly, the governor, if he gets to him the bill passed by the state legislature after reconsideration, he must give his assent within 3 months, within a month. Here again the governor, a bill passed by the state legislature comes to the governor sends it back for reconsideration. After the reconsidered bill comes to the governor must give the assent within 1 month. That's what the Supreme Court said in the recent case. In other cases, a bill passed by the state legislature, if it goes to the governor cannot sit on the bill. The governor must decide the bill within 3 months. That's what the Supreme Court said in the recent case. That's about the legislative powers of the governor. When it comes to the financial powers, the money bill in the state legislature can be introduced in the legislative assembly. A money bill at the state level can be introduced in the legislative assembly only with the prior recommendation of the governor. As the money bill is introduced in the state legislative assembly with the prior recommendation of the governor cannot reject a money bill. The governor cannot reject a money bill. And the contingency fund at the state level is under the control of the governor. That's about the financial powers. When it comes to judicial powers, like the President of India, the governor also has got pardoning powers, power of commutation, power of remission, power of respite, power of reprieve. So pardoning, the governor cannot pardon a death sentence, and other punishments can be pardoned by the governor. Then commutation means, as I said, giving a lesser severe punishment compared to more severe punishment. Remission means reducing the duration of punishment without changing the character. Then respite means in the context of disability or a convict being a pregnant woman, there will be a lesser punishment that is called respite. A reprieve means staying the execution of the punishment so that the convict can apply for clemency to the governor. That's about the judicial powers. Then, see, the institution of governor has become very controversial. What are the reasons? So we all know that the governor is appointed by the President of India on the advice of the Union government. So the governors, they started acting as the agents of the central government. And there were innumerable instances wherein the governors have misused and abused their powers to impress the Union government. So in the past, in one of the cases, Hargovind Pant versus Raghukul Tilak. In this case, the Supreme Court said, governor, the office of the governor is a constitutional office. The governor is not an employee of the central government. So the governor is the constitutional head of the state government, which means in this judgment the Supreme Court said In this judgment, the Supreme Court said the governor need not act like an employee of the union government. He can remain independent and uphold the Constitution of India. That is a Hargovind Pant versus Raghukul Tilak case. Which means when the governor is administered oath, he takes oath saying that he will preserve, protect and defend the Constitution of India. And when it comes to the discretionary powers again, unlike the President of India, the governor enjoys constitutional discretion. The President enjoys only situational discretion. But here, the discretionary powers of the governor must be exercised in such a way that the governor protects, preserves and defends the Constitution of India. Many a time, the governors made use of their discretionary powers to undermine the Constitution of India. That is not allowed. Even Madan Mohan Punchi Commission and the Supreme Court, they have said that the discretionary powers of the governor, they are not wide, they are only limited powers. And even these discretionary powers must be exercised keeping in mind their duty, constitutional duty, to preserve, protect and defend the Constitution of India. The discretionary powers cannot be used according to their whims and fancies to subvert and undermine the Constitution of India. So discretionary powers are conferred on the governor as the constitutional head of the state government to preserve, protect and defend the Constitution of India. Then the Madan Mohan Punchi Commission has given an important recommendation to make the institution of governor much more independent. I said that the President of India can be impeached by the Parliament. Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha shall pass a removal motion by 2/3 of the members present and voting. On the same lines, remember in India, we have a number of constitutional authorities which have behaved in a very proper way, in an independent manner. That's because they are given the security of tenure. For example, take the judges of the Supreme Court, judges of the High Court. A judge of Supreme Court and a judge of High Court can't be removed straight away. The removal has to be done by the Parliament by special majority. So that's why in India, the Supreme Court is independent, High Courts are independent. Similarly, CAG, Comptroller and Auditor General, though he is appointed by the government, his removal is not in the hands of the union government. He can be removed only by the Parliament by special majority. CAG has remained independent. Election Commission of India, take Election Commission of India. The Chief Election Commissioner, though appointed by the union government, can't be removed by the union government straight away. He enjoys security of tenure. He can be removed only by the Parliament by special majority. Similarly, the State Election Commissioner, though appointed by the governor, he can be removed only by the Parliament by special majority. So all these institutions have remained independent and impartial because they enjoy the security of tenure. The governor has not remained independent, and so the office has been very much abused and misused. So in this context, Madan Mohan Punchi Commission has made a very useful recommendation. So this commission says, let the union government appoint the governor, but the removal of the governor must not be in the hands of the union government. The governor must be removed by the state legislature by 2/3 of the members of the total strength. So if there is a state legislature which is bicameral, if the governor has to be removed in the legislative assembly, in the legislative council, 2/3 of the total strength shall agree for the removal. So then the governor will have security of tenure, and the governor doesn't need to dance to the tunes of the union government. He can remain independent and impartial. And much of the controversy with respect to the institution of governor will come down if this recommendation is implemented. Then there is one important case related to Governor BP Singhal versus Union of India. See, initially in the Constitution of India, there was no fixed tenure to the governor. The governor stays in office during the pleasure of the president, which means the governor can be removed at any point of time by the president without a reason. So this is called the doctrine of pleasure. Doctrine of pleasure. But we all know that India is a constitutional democracy, and in India we believe in the philosophy of constitutionalism, which means the philosophy of constitutionalism says that the governments enjoy limited powers. They enjoy only those powers conferred on the Constitution. There is supremacy of the Constitution. So when there was a change of government at the union level, the governors are being asked to resign. When this matter went before the Supreme Court said the governors cannot be removed by the union government without a valid reason. The doctrine of pleasure is not absolute. In India, there is rule of the law, there is constitutionalism philosophy, there is supremacy of the constitution. The governors, if they are to be removed, the union government through the president can remove them only by giving valid reasons. Without valid reasons, if the governors are removed, the Supreme Court will intervene and will protect their tenure. That's what the Supreme Court said in this particular case, BP Singhal versus Union of India. Despite this judgment, we often see the governors being pressurized to resign when there is a change of government at the union level. Then let us discuss the Chief Minister. Here we have three important articles, 163, 164, 167. And along with that, we have the State Council of Ministers. So here 163, 164, 167. Article 163 says, the governor shall act on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers headed by Chief Minister, which means the governor is bound by the advice of the State Council of Ministers. What advice is given by the Council of Ministers headed by Chief Minister to the governor cannot be questioned in any court of law. And Article 163 also speaks about discretionary powers of the governor. So the Constitution in certain situations has conferred discretion to the governor. For example, when the governor administers the 5th schedule areas, he has constitutional discretion, which means he doesn't need to follow the advice of the Council of Ministers headed by governor. But remember, these discretionary powers are given to the governor to be utilized, to be exercised in a manner to preserve, protect and defend the Constitution of India. The discretionary powers cannot be used by the governor as per their personal whims and fancies to undermine the Constitution of India. So that's one thing. That is about Article 163. The next one is Article 164. As I said, Article 164 says that the Chief Minister is appointed by the governor, other ministers are appointed by the governor on the advice of the Chief Minister. And Article 164 also says the maximum strength of the Council of Ministers cannot exceed 15% of the Legislative Assembly, and the minimum number cannot go less than 12. And the Council of Ministers headed by Chief Minister is collectively responsible to the Legislative Assembly, which means the government of the day can be removed by passing no confidence motion in the Legislative Assembly. And if there is an MLA who has become a minister, if he is disqualified under the anti-defection law, he also gets disqualified to continue as the minister. That's about Article 164. Then the next article is 167. Article 167 says, it speaks about the relationship between the Chief Minister and the governor. So Article 167 puts a constitutional duty on the Chief Minister to inform the governor about the administration at the state level, and also all the important proposals for legislation must be communicated to the governor. In addition to that, if there is any decision taken by a minister in the state government without taking it to the notice of the Council of Ministers, the governor can intervene and can ask the Chief Minister to submit such a decision for the consideration of the entire Council of Ministers headed by Chief Minister. That's what Article 167 says. So these are the important articles, 163, 164, 167. So that's it about the Chief Minister and the Council of Ministers. And then we are left with the Advocate General of India. Advocate General of India is also part of the state executive. Advocate General of India is the chief legal officer at the level of the state government. With the resignation of the Chief Minister, Advocate General will also submit resignation. So the Advocate General will represent the state in the High Court and also the courts below the High Court. So that's it about the state executive. With this we have done about the executive branch of the union government. We have completed union executive and also the state executive. Thank you.